Alrighty, good morning. We are reading the third book in the series of the Left Behind books. We are on the book called Nicolae, and we are now reading chapter 19. And I'll begin to read. Rayford was proud of Hattie Durham. From what he could gather in New Babylon, she had pulled another fast one on Nicolae and his henchman Leon Fortunato. Apparently, she had flown from Milwaukee to Boston, but rather than taking her connecting flight on to Baghdad, she had stopped somewhere. Rayford had been out of hearing range, of course, when the meetings with Peter Matthews were continued at New Babylon headquarters. All he knew was that there was great consternation around the place, especially among Nicolae and Leon, that Hattie had slipped off schedule yet again. Though Nicolae had shown indifference to her, not knowing where she was made her a loose cannon and a potential embarrassment. When word finally arrived that she had a new itinerary, Carpathia himself asked to see Rayford in private. The new secretarial staff was in place and operational by the time Rayford entered Suite 216 and was granted audience with the Potentate. "It is good to see you again, Captain Steele. I fear I have not been as forthcoming with my thanks for your service as I used to be before so many distractions have come about." "Let me get straight to the point. I know that Miss Durham once worked for you. In fact, you came to us based on her recommendation. I know also that she has a time confided in you. Thus, it should come as no surprise to you that there have been some trouble in paradise, as they say. Let me be frank. The fact is, I believe Miss Durham always overestimated the seriousness of our personal relationship." Rayford thought back to when Nicolae had seemed to proudly announce that Hattie was pregnant and that she was wearing his ring. But Rayford knew better than to try to catch the liar of liars in a lie. Carpathia continued, "Miss Durham should have realized that in a position such as the one I hold, there really is no room for a personal life that would enjoy the commitment required by a marriage and family. She seemed pleased with the prospect of bearing a child, my child. Thus, I did not discourage that or encourage some other option. Should she take the pregnancy to term, I would, of course, exercise my fiscal responsibility. However, it is unfair for her to expect me to devote the time that might be available to the normal father. My advice to her would be to terminate the pregnancy. However, due to the fact that this result of our relationship is really her responsibility, I will leave that decision to her." Rayford was puzzled and didn't try to hide it. Why was Carpathia telling him this? What assignment was going to fall to him? He didn't have long to wait. "I have needs like any other man, Captain Steele. You understand. I would never commit myself to just one woman, and I certainly made no such commitment to Miss Durham. The fact is that I already have someone else with whom I am enjoying a relationship. Therefore, you can see my dilemma." "I'm not sure I do," Rayford said. "Well, I have replaced Miss Durham as my personal assistant. I sense that she is distraught from that, and from what she has to deduce is a relationship that has soured. I do not see it as souring, I see us both moving on. But as I say, as she saw it as more important a commitment than I did, she is thus more upset and disappointed at the conclusion of it." "I need to ask you about the ring you gave her," Rayford said. "Oh, that is no problem. I will not be requiring that back. In fact, I always believed that the stone was much too large to be worn as an engagement ring. It clearly is decorative. She need not worry about returning that." Rayford was getting the picture. Carpathia was going to call on him as Hattie's old friend and boss to deliver the news. Why else would he need all this information? "I will do the right thing by Miss Durham, Captain Steele. You may be assured of that. I would not want her to become destitute. I know she is employable, probably not as a clerical person, but certainly in the aviation industry, which has been devastated by the war, as you know," Rayford said. "Yes, but with her seniority and perhaps with some gentle pressure on my part." "And so you're saying that you will give her some sort of severance or a settlement?" Carpathia seemed to brighten. Yes, if that will make it easier for her, I am happy to do that. I should think you would be, Rayford thought. Captain Steele, I have an assignment for you. I deduced that. Of course you would. You are a bright man. We have received word that Miss Durham is back on her itinerary and is expected in Baghdad on a flight from Boston on Monday. It finally hit Rayford why Hattie might have delayed her return. Perhaps she knew of Amanda's plans. It would be just like Amanda to arrange to meet her somewhere and accompany her back. Amanda would have had an ulterior motive, of course, to keep Hattie from visiting a reproductive clinic. She also would have wanted to continue expressing love to her. Rayford decided against telling Carpathia he was headed to the airport in Baghdad Monday anyway to pick up his own wife. Assuming you are free, Captain Steele, and I will make sure that you are, I would ask that you would meet Miss Durham's plane. As her old friend, you will be the right one to break this news to her. Her belongings have been delivered to one of the condominiums in your building. She will be allowed to stay there for a month before deciding where she would like to relocate. Rayford interrupted. Excuse me, but are you asking me to do something that you yourself should be doing? Oh, make no mistake, Captain Steele. I am not afraid of this confrontation. It would be most distasteful for me, yes, but I recognize my responsibility here. It is just that I am under such crushing deadlines for important meetings. We have established many new directives and legislative inside of the recent insurrection, and I simply cannot be away from the office. Rayford thought Carpathia's meeting with Hattie Durham might have taken less time than the meeting they were conducting right then, but what was the sense of arguing with a man like this? Any questions, Captain Steele? No, it's all very clear to me. You will do it then? I was not under the impression I had a choice. Carpathia smiled. You have a good sense of humor, Captain Steele. I would not say your job depends on it, but I appreciate that your military background has trained you to realize that when a directive is given, it is to be carried out. I want you to know that I appreciate it. Rayford stared at him. He willed himself not to say the obligatory, You're welcome. He nodded and stood. Captain Steele, might I ask you to remain seated for a moment? Rayford sat back down. What now? Is this the beginning of the end? I would like to ask you about your relationship with Cameron Williams. Rayford did not respond at first. Carpathia continued. Sometimes known as Buck Williams. He was formerly a senior staff writer for Global Weekly, now Global Community Weekly. He is my publisher there. He's my son-in-law, Rayford said. And can you think of any reason why he would not have shared that happy news with me? I suppose you'll have to ask him that, sir. Well, then, perhaps I should ask you, why would you not have shared that with me? It's just personal family business, Rayford said, trying to remain calm. Anyway, with him serving you at such a high level, I assumed you would become aware of it soon enough. Does it happen that he shares your religious beliefs? I prefer not to speak for Buck. I will take that as a yes. Rayford stared at him. Carpathia continued. I am not saying that this is necessarily a problem, you understand. I understand, all right, Rayford thought. I was just curious, Carpathia concluded. He smiled at Rayford, and the pilot read everything in that smile that the Antichrist implied. I will look forward to a report of your meeting with Miss Durham, and I have full confidence that it will be successful. Buck was at the Chicago office of Global Community Weekly when he took a call from Amanda. I got the strangest call from Rayford, she said. He asked if I had hooked up with Hattie on her flight out of Boston to Baghdad. I told him no. I thought she was already back there. He said he thought she was on another schedule now and that we would likely be arriving at about the same time. I asked him what was up, but he seemed rushed and didn't feel free to take the time to tell me. Do you know what's happening? This is all news to me, Amanda. Did your flight refuel in Boston as well? Yes, you know New York is completely shut down. So is Washington. I don't know if these planes can go all the way from Milwaukee to Baghdad. What would have taken Hattie so long to get back there? I have no idea. If I had known she was going to delay her return, I would have offered to have flown with her. We need to maintain contact with that girl. Buck agreed. Chloe misses you already. She and Tyson are working hard on some New Testament curriculum. It's almost as if they're in the same room, though they're at least a quarter of a mile apart. I know she's enjoying that, Amanda said. I wish I could talk Rayford into letting me move back this way. I see less of him, but I don't see much of him in New Babylon either. Don't forget you can be in that same room with Tyson and Chloe no matter where you are now. Yeah, she said, except that we're 9 hours later than you guys. You'll just have to coordinate your schedules. Where are you now? We're over the continent. Should be touching down in an hour or so. It's it's what's there, just a little after 8 in the morning. Right, the tribulation force is about as spread out as it's been for a while. Tyson seems productive and contented, if not happy. Chloe is at Loretta's and excited about her study and her teaching opportunities, though she knows she may not always be free legally to do that. I'm here, you're there, and you'll be meeting with Brayford before you know it. I guess we're all present and accounted for. I sure hope Brayford's right about Hattie, Amanda said. It'll be handy if he can pick us both up. It was time for Rayford to head for Baghdad. He was confused. Why had Hattie remained in Denver for so long and then misled Fortunato about her return flight when she did reestablish contact? If it wasn't for the purpose of hooking up with Amanda, what was it? What would have interested her in Boston? Rayford couldn't wait to see Amanda. It had been only a few days, but they were still newlyweds, after all. He did not relish his assignment with Hattie, especially with Amanda getting in at the same time. One thing he could justify, however, based on what he had been told about Hattie's encounter with Loretta, Chloe, and Amanda at the safe house, was that Hattie would be comforted by Amanda's presence. The question was, would this word from Rayford be bad news for Hattie? It might make her future easier to accept. She knew it was over. She feared Carpathia might not let her go. She would be offended, of course, insulted. She wouldn't want his ring or his money or his condo, but at least she would know. To Rayford's male mind, this seemed a practical solution. He had learned enough from Irene and Amanda over the years, however, to know that regardless of how unattractive Nicolae Carpathia had become to Hattie, still she would be hurt and would feel rejected. Rayford phoned Hattie's driver. Could you drive me or could I borrow your car? I'm to pick up Miss Durham in Baghdad and also Oh, sorry, sir. I'm no longer Miss Durham's driver. I drive for someone else in the executive suite. You know where I could get wheels then? You could try the motor pool, but that takes a while. Lots of paperwork, you know. I don't have that kind of time. Any other suggestions? Rayford was angry with himself for not planning better. If the potentate called the motor pool, you'll have a vehicle as quick as you wanted it. Rayford phoned Carpathia's office. The secretary said he was unavailable. Is he there? Rayford asked. He is here, sir, but as I said, he's not available. This is sort of urgent. If he's at all interruptible, I'd appreciate it if you'd let me talk to him for just a second. When the secretary came back on the line, she said, the potentate wants to know if you could drop by his office for a moment before you finish your assignment for him. I'm a little short of time, but I'll tell him you'll be here then. Rayford was 3 blocks from Carpathia's building. He hurried down in the elevator and jogged toward headquarters. He had a sudden thought and grabbed his phone. As he ran, he called McCollum. Mac, are you free right now? Good. I need a chopper ride to Baghdad. My wife's coming in, and I'm supposed to meet Hattie Durham as well. Rumors about her? I'm not at liberty to say anything, Mac. I'll be in Carpathia's office in a few minutes. Meet you on the helipad. Good, thanks. Buck was working on his laptop with his office door shut when the machine signaled that he had incoming real-time mail. The message was from Tyson. He asked, shall we try video? Buck typed, sure, and he tapped in the code. It took a few seconds to program itself, but then Tyson's image flickered on the screen. Buck tapped in. Is that you, or am I looking in the mirror? Tyson responded, it's me. We could use the audio and talk to each other if you're in a secure area. Better not, Buck tapped in. Did you want something specific? I would like a companion for breakfast, Tyson said. I'm feeling much better today, but I'm getting a little claustrophobic here. I know you can't sneak me out, but could you get in without Loretta suspecting? I'll try. What would you like for breakfast? I have cooked up something American just for you, Buck. I'm turning my screen now to see if it can pick it up. The machine was not really built to pan around a dark underground shelter. Buck typed in, I can't see anything, but I'll trust you. Be there as soon as I can. Buck told the receptionist he would be gone for a couple hours, but as he was heading to the Range Rover, Verna Z caught him. Where are you going? She asked. I'm sorry, he said. I want to know where you'll be. I'm not sure where I'll be, he said. The desk knows I'll be gone for a couple hours. I don't feel obligated to share specifics. Verna shook her head. Rayford slowed as he reached the grand entrance of Global Community Headquarters. The compound had been set in an unusual area where upscale residences surrounded it. Something had caught Rayford's attention. Animal noises, barking. He had been aware of dogs in the area. Many employees owned expensive breeds they enjoyed walking and tethering outside their places. They were showpieces of prosperity. He had heard one or two barking at times, but now they were all barking. They were noisy enough that he turned to see if he could detect what was agitating them. So, he saw a couple of dogs jerk away from their owners and race down the street howling. He shrugged and entered the building. Buck considered swinging by Loretta's house and picking up Chloe. He would have to think of a story to tell Loretta at the church office. He wouldn't be able to park or walk into the church without her seeing him. Maybe he and Chloe would just spend some time with her and then appear to be leaving the church the back way. If no one was watching, they could slip down and see Tyson. It sounded like a plan. Buck was halfway to Mount Prospect when he noticed something strange. Roadkill, lots of it, and more potential roadkill, skittering across the streets. Squirrels, rabbits, snakes. Snakes? He had seen few snakes in the Midwest, particularly this far north. The occasional garter snake was all. That's what these were, but why so many of them? Coons, possums, ducks, geese, dogs, cats, animals everywhere. He lowered the window of the Range Rover and listened. Huge clouds of birds swept from tree to tree, but the sky was bright, cloudless. There seemed to be no wind. No leaf even shivered on a tree. Buck waited at a stoplight and noticed that despite the lack of wind, the streetlights swayed. Signs bent back and forth. Buck blew the light and raced toward Mount Prospect. Rayford was ushered into Carpathia's office. The potentate had several VIPs around a conference table. He quickly pulled Rayford aside. Thank you for stopping in, Captain Steele. I just wanted to reiterate my wish that I not have to face Miss Durham. She may want to talk to me. That will be out of the question. Excuse me, Leon Fortunato interrupted. But potent, sir, we're getting some strange readouts on our power meters. Your power meters? Carpathia asked. I leave maintenance to you and your staff, Leon. Sir, the secretary said, an emergency call for you or Mr. Fortunato from the International Seismograph Institute. Carpathia looked irritated and whirled to face Fortunato. Take that, will you, Leon? I am busy here. Fortunato took the call and appeared to want to keep quiet until he blurted, What? What? Now Carpathia was angry. Leon. Rayford moved away from Carpathia and looked out the window. Below, dogs ran in circles, their owners chasing them. Rayford reached in his pocket for his cell phone and quickly called McCollum. Carpathia glared at him. Captain Steele, I was talking to you here. Mac, where are you? Start her up. I'm on my way now. Suddenly, the power went out. Only battery-operated lights near the ceiling shined, and the bright sun flooded through the windows. The secretary screamed. Fortunato turned to Carpathia and tried to tell him what he had just heard. Carpathia shouted above the din, I would like order in here, please. And as if someone had flipped a switch, the day went black. Now even the grown men moaned and shrieked. Those battery-operated lights in the corner cast a haunting glow on the building, which began to shudder. Rayford made a dash for the door. He sensed someone right behind him. He pushed the elevator button and then smacked himself in the head, remembering there was no power. He dashed upstairs to the roof where McCollum had the chopper blades whirling. The building shifted under Rayford like the surf. The chopper, resting on the skis, dipped first to the left and then to the right. Rayford reached for the opening, seeing Mac's wide eyes. As Rayford tried to climb in, he was pushed from behind and flew up behind Mac. Nicolae Carpathia was scrambling in. "Lift off," he shouted. "Lift off." McCollum raised the chopper about a foot off the roof. "Others are coming," he shouted. "No more room," Carpathia hollered. "Lift off." As two young women and several middle-aged men grabbed the struts, Mac pulled away from the building. As he banked left, his lights illuminated the roof, where others came shrieking and crying out the door. As Rayford watched in horror, the entire 18-story building, filled with hundreds of employees, crashed to the ground in a mighty roar and a cloud of dust. One by one, the screaming people hanging from the chopper fell away. Rayford stared at Carpathia in the dim light from the control panel. He saw no expression. Carpathia simply appeared busy about strapping himself in. Rayford was ill. He had seen people die. Carpathia had ordered Mac away from people who might have been saved. Rayford could have killed the man with his bare hands. Wondering if he wouldn't have been better off to have died in the building himself, Rayford shook his head and resolutely fastened his seatbelt. "Baghdad," he shouted. "Baghdad Airport." Buck had known exactly what was coming and had been speeding through lights and stop signs, jumping curbs and going around cars and trucks. He wanted to get to Chloe at Loretta's house first. He reached for his phone, but he had not stored speed dial numbers yet, and there was no way he could drive this quickly and punch in an entire number at the same time. He tossed the phone on the seat and kept going. He was going through an intersection when the sun was snuffed out. Day went to night in an instant, and power went out all over the area. People quickly turned on their headlights, but Buck saw it too late. He was heading for a fissure in the road that had opened before him. It looked at least 10 feet wide and that deep. He figured if he dropped into it, he would be killed, but he was going too fast to avoid it. He wrenched the wheel to the left, and the Range Rover rolled over completely before plunging down into the hole. The passenger side airbag deployed and quietly deflated. It was time to find out what this car was made of. Ahead of him, the gap narrowed. There would be no going out that way unless he could start going up first. He pushed the buttons that gave him all-wheel drive and stick shift, shifted into low gear, crimped the front wheel slightly to the left, and floored the accelerator. The left front tire bit into the steep bank of the crevice, and suddenly Buck shot almost straight up. A small car behind him dropped front first into the hole and burst into flames. The ground shifted and broke up. A huge section of sidewalk pushed up from the ground and more than 10 feet and toppled into the street. The sound was deafening. Buck had never raised his window after listening to the animals, and now the thunderous crashing enveloped him as trucks flipped over the street lamps, telephone poles, and houses fell. Buck told himself to slow down. Speed would kill him. He had to see what he was encountering and pick his way through it. The Range Rover bounced and twisted. Once he spun in a circle. People who had for the moment survived this were driving wildly and smashing into each other. How long would it last? Buck was disoriented. He looked at the compass on the dash and tried to stay pointed to the west. For a moment, there seemed almost a pattern in the street. He went down, then up, then down, then up, as if on a roller coaster. But the great quake had just begun. What at first appeared as jagged peaks the rover could handle quickly became swirling masses of mud and asphalt. Cars were swallowed up in them. Horror was not a good enough word for it. Rayford could not bring himself to speak to Carpathia or even to Mac. They were headed toward Baghdad Airport, and Rayford could not keep from staring at the devastation below. Fires had broken out all over the place. They illuminated car crashes, flattening buildings, the earth rolling and rolling like an angry sea. What appeared a huge ball of gasoline fire caught his eye. There, hanging in the sky, so close it seemed he could touch it, it was the moon, the blood-red moon. Buck was not thinking of himself. He was thinking of Chloe. He was thinking of Loretta. He was thinking of Tyson. Could God have brought them through all this only to let them die in the great earthquake, the sixth seal judgment? If they all went to be with God, so much the better. Was it too much to ask that it be painless for his loved ones? If they were to go, he prayed, Lord, take them quickly. The quake roared on and on, a monster that gobbled everything in sight. Buck recoiled in horror as his head Lights shone on a huge house dropping completely underground. How far was he from Chloe at Loretta's? Would he have a better chance of getting to Loretta and Tyson at the church? Soon Buck found his the only vehicle in sight. No street lights, no traffic lights, no street signs. Houses were crumbling. Above the road, he heard screams, saw people running, tripping, falling, rolling. The Range Rover bounced and shook. He couldn't count the times his head hit the roof. Once a strip of curb rolled up and pushed the Range Rover on its side. Buck thought the end was near. He was not going to take it lying down. There he was, pressed up against the left side of the vehicle, strapped in. He reached for the seatbelt. He was going to unfasten it and climb out the passenger side window. Just before he got it unlatched, the rolling earth uprighted the Range Rover and off he drove again. Glass broke, walls fell, restaurants disappeared, car dealerships were swallowed. Office buildings stood at jagged angles, then slowly toppled. Again, Buck saw a gap in the road he could not avoid. He closed his eyes and braced himself, feeling his tires rolled over an uneven surface and break glass and crumble metal. He looked around quickly as he took a left and saw that he had driven over the top of someone else's car. He hardly knew where he was. He just kept heading west. If only he could get to the church or to Loretta's house. Would he recognize either? Was this a prayer that anyone he knew anywhere in the world was still alive? Mac had caught a glimpse of the moon. Rayford could see he was awestruck. He maneuvered the chopper so Nicolae could see it too. Carpathia seemed to stare at it in wonder. It illustrated his face in its awful red glow, and the man had never looked more like the devil. Great sobs rose in Rayford's chest and throat as he looked at the destruction and mayhem below. He knew the odds were against his finding Amanda. Lord, receive her unto yourself without suffering, please. And was it possible she might have received Christ before this? Could there have been somebody in Boston or on the plane who would have helped her make the transaction? Suddenly there came a meteor shower as if the sky was falling. Huge flaming rocks streaked from the sky. Rayford had seen it go from day to night and now back to day with all the flames. Buck gasped as the Range Rover finally hit something that made it stop. The back end had settled into a small indentation and the headlights pointed straight up. Buck had both hands on the wheel and he was reclining, staring at the sky. Suddenly the heavens opened. Monstrous black and purple clouds rode upon each other and seemed to peel back the very blackness of the night. Meteors came hurtling down, smashing everything that had somehow avoided being swallowed. One landed next to Buck's door, so hot that it melted the windshield and made Buck unlatch his seatbelt and try to scramble out the right side. But as he did, another molten rock exploded behind the Range Rover and punched it out of the ditch. Buck was thrown into the back seat and hit his head on the ceiling. He was dazed, but he knew if he stayed in one place he was dead. He climbed over the seat and got behind the wheel again. He strapped himself in, thinking how flimsy that precaution seemed against the greatest earthquake in the history of mankind. There seemed no diminishing of the motion of the earth. These were not aftershocks. This thing simply was not going to quit. Buck drove slowly, the Range Rover's headlights jerking and bouncing crazily as first one side and then the other dropped and flew into the air. Buck thought he recognized a landmark, a low-slung restaurant at a corner 3 blocks from the church. Somehow he had to keep going. He carefully drove around and through destruction and mayhem. The earth continued to shift and roll, but he just kept going. Through his blown-out window, he saw people running, heard them screaming, saw their gasping wounds and their blood. They tried to hide under rocks that had been disgorged from the earth. They used upright chunks of asphalt and sidewalk to protect them, but just as quickly they were crushed. A middle-aged man, shirtless and shoeless and bleeding, looked heavenward through broken glasses and opened his arms wide. He screamed to the sky, "God, kill me, kill me." And as Buck slowly pounced past in the Range Rover, the man was swallowed into the earth. Rayford had lost hope. Part of him was praying that the helicopter would drop from the sky and crash. The irony was he knew Nicolae Carpathia was not to die for yet another 21 months, and then he would be resurrected and live another 3.5 years. No meteor would smash that helicopter, and wherever they landed, they would somehow be safe. All because Rayford had been running an errand for the Antichrist. Buck's heart sank as he saw the steeple of New Hope Village Church. It had to be less than 600 yards away. But the earth was still churning. Things were still crashing. Huge trees fell and dragged power lines into the street. Buck spent several minutes wending his way through debris and over huge piles of wood and dirt and cement. The closer he got to the church, the emptier he felt in his heart. That steeple was the only thing standing. Its base rested at ground level. The lights of the Range Rover illuminated pews, sitting in neat rows, some of them unscathed. The rest of the sanctuary, the high arch beams, the stained glass windows, all gone. The administration building, the classrooms, the offices were flattened to the ground in a pile of bricks and glass and mortar. One car was visible in a crater in what used to be the parking lot. The bottom of the car was flat on the ground, all four tires blown, axles broken, two bare human legs protruded from under the car. Buck stopped the Range Rover 100 feet from that mess in the parking lot. He shifted into park and turned off the engine. His door would not open. He loosened his belt and climbed out the passenger side, and suddenly the earthquake stopped. The sun reappeared. It was a bright, sunshiny Monday morning in Mount Prospect, Illinois. Buck felt every bone in his body. He staggered over the uneven ground toward that little flattened car. When he was close enough, he saw that a crushed body was missing a shoe. The one that remained, however, confirmed his fear. Loretta had been crushed by her own car. Buck stumbled and fell face down in the dirt, something gashing his cheek. He ignored it and crawled to the car. He braced himself and pushed with all his might, trying to roll the vehicle off the body. It would not budge. Everything in him screamed against leaving Loretta there. But where would he take the body if he could free it? Sobbing now, he crawled through the debris, looking for any entrance to the underground shelter. Small, recognizable areas of the fellowship hall allowed him to crawl around what was left of the flattened church. The conduit and that led to the steeple had been snapped. He made his way over bricks and chunks of wood. Finally, he found the vent shaft. He cupped his hands over it and shouted down into it, "Tyson, Tyson, are you there?" He turned and put his ear to the shaft, feeling cool air rush from the shelter. "I am here, Buck. Can you hear me?" "I hear you, Tyson. Are you all right?" "I am all right. I cannot get out the door." "You don't want to see what's up here anyway, Tyson," Buck shouted, his voice getting weaker. "How is Loretta?" "Gone." "Was it the great earthquake?" "It was." "Can you get to me?" "I will get to you if it's the last thing I do, Tyson. I need you to help me look for Chloe." "I am okay for now, Buck. I will wait for you." Buck turned to look in the direction of the safe house. People staggered in ragged clothes, bleeding. Some dropped and seemed to die in front of his eyes. He didn't know how long it would take him to get to Chloe. He was sure he would not want to see what he found there, but he would not stop until he did. If there was one chance in a million of getting to her, of saving her, he would do it. The sun had reappeared over New Babylon. Rayford urged Mac McCollum to keep going towards Baghdad. Everywhere the three of them looked was destruction. Craters from meteors, fire burning, buildings flattened, roads wasted. When Baghdad Airport came into sight, Rayford hung his head and wept. Jumbo jets were twisted, some sticking out of great cavities in the ground. The terminal was flattened. The tower was down, bodies strewn everywhere. Rayford signaled Mac to set the chopper down. But as he surveyed the area, Rayford knew the only prayer for Amanda or for Hattie was that their planes were still in the air when this occurred. When the blades stopped whirling, Carpathia turned to the other two. "Do either of you have a working phone?" Rayford was so disgusted he reached past Carpathia and pushed open the door. He slipped out from behind Carpathia's seat and jumped to the ground. Then he reached in, loosened Carpathia's belt, grabbed him by the lapels, and yanked him out of the chopper. Carpathia landed on his seat on the uneven ground. He jumped up quickly, as if ready to fight. Rayford pushed him back up against the helicopter. "Captain Steele, I understand you are upset, but—" "Nicolae," Rayford said, his words rushing through clenched teeth. "You can explain this away any way you want, But let me be the first to tell you, you have just seen the wrath of the Lamb. Carpathia shrugged. Rayford gave him a last shove against the helicopter and stumbled away. He set his face toward the airport terminal, a quarter-mile away. He prayed this would be the last time he had to search for the body of a loved one in the rubble. So when he opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. And I saw the seven angels who stand before God, and to them were given seven trumpets. Then another angel, having a golden censer, came and stood at the altar. He was given much incense, that he should offer it with prayers of all saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints ascended before God from the angel's hand. Then the angel took the censer, filled it with fire from the altar, and threw it to the earth. And there was noises, thunderings, lightnings, and an earthquake. So the seven angels who had the seven trumpets prepared themselves to sound. And that is Revelations 8, 1 through 6. And that is the end of book 3, Nicolae. We will be starting on the next book, the fourth book in the series of the Left Behind series. Thank you for joining me and have a wonderful day.